Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the PrimateCast. I'm your host, Andrew McIntosh, and the release date for today's podcast is Saturday, October the 18th, 2014. And today on the podcast, we're doing something a little bit different. So I have with me in the studio Cécile Sarabian, as we mentioned last week.
Hello.
Welcome to the PrimateCast again.
Thank you.
And so what we're doing today is I have given creative license to Cécile to put together a podcast from her recent trip to the Student Conference in Conservation Science, which was held in Bangalore.
Yes, so recently I just came back from Bangalore, where I attended the Student Conference on Conservation Science, which was held at the Indian Institute of Science between the 25th and the 28th of September. So I went there because beside the PrimateCast, I also had a project that I wanted to present. I was participating in the Who is Who in Conservation, and I went to present a poster on Roots and Shoots Iran. So Roots and Shoots program. Roots and Shoots first is an education program that was created by Dr. Jane Goodall in 1991 in Tanzania with a group of students. And the goal of Roots and Shoots is for the young people to identify the problem in their community and to try to work on it. And then they create their own small projects to make their place a better place in terms of, it can be conservation, it can be humanitarian projects, environmental issues, and etc. So in Iran, I'm half Iranian, half French, and I know that the environmental awareness there is not that great. And I felt at some point that I wanted to do something in this field. And I knew about Roots and Shoots, I knew about Dr. Jane Goodall. I also knew that she was going to visit our institute. It was 1.5 years ago.
It was the time that we had the interview with Jane, actually, on the
right.
PrimateCast. Yeah. That'd be number 8.
Yeah. And so she came here at PRI, but I was in my field side. So I wrote her a letter about my idea to develop Roots and Shoots in Iran. And eventually she replied after she left Japan from South Korea, I think. And she sent me back a letter saying that, it would be fantastic. So when you receive such letter from Dr. Goodall, then you just feel, okay, now I have to take action. And I was already in touch with a group of environmental activists and friends from Mashhad, northeast of the country in Iran, and together. So I went there like a few months after this letter, and we gathered together. We organized a meeting and set up the goals we wanted to act on it. And
So if I remember correctly, one of the first activities that you guys put together was a translation into Farsi of one of Jane Goodall's documentaries.
That was one of the... We were thinking that to introduce the program, we needed first an introduction of Jane Goodall. So we translated into Farsi Jane's Journey, which was a famous documentary introducing Roots and Shoots, released in 2010.
Yeah. And so you're at this conference in Bangalore, you were representing Roots and Shoots Iran, but so it's not just you, there's a team now.
No, there is a team on the ground. As I say, I'm the spokesperson, but because I'm not living in Iran right now, I'm not the one who does a lot of great job. So there is a team there. It's managed by Mohammad Haimpana, who is the manager of the project, and Dr. Vahabzadeh, who is now a renowned and retired ecologist, and he is also very involved in the project. And our project now is kind of taking a turn. So because they think that what is important, the most important, if you want to educate the people about environmental issues, is education. And they want this program to be kind of different of what we can see now, built on the children and nature relation. we think that it's actually the most important. And you even have some publications saying that at your early age, it's very important to build this relation. And if you don't have this relation, then it will affect your relation to nature in the future. And Mashhad is the second biggest city in Iran, so it's very important for the kids there. So they started by bringing groups of kids into the surrounding of Mashhad in the mountain and just interacting in the nature, with the nature. And now they have this project of the School of Nature, the Mashhad School of Nature. And it's basically a farm where there are lots of vegetables and animals, and on a daily basis, weekly basis, children can come in the farm and just interact with the nature. The idea is to let them free, have their own experience with nature. That's a new kind of new concept, at least for Iran.
Mm-hmm. And so, how was the poster received at the conference? I mean, did you get to talk to a lot of people about what's going on in Iran, and how did people react to that from India?
Yeah, it was great. There were lots of people coming to me, and the poster. I got a lot of contacts, even people in India or around the world involved in kind of similar projects, but with a different approach. So it was great exchanging with them.
Were there any other Roots and Shoots groups at the conference?
No.
Okay.
No.
And were there any other Iranian delegates there?
No.
Okay, so you're really representing.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, so tell us about the podcasting experience there. So again, it wasn't just you. You had a big backdrop.
No, so I had a fantastic team of podcast volunteers with me. So I had with me Dina Raskina, who is a junior research fellow at the National Center for Biological Science in Bangalore. Pankaj Kopalde, who is a program fellow working with Salim Ali Center for Ornithology and Natural History. And Durgesh Singh, who is a research intern at Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment in Bangalore. And finally, Ananya, who is a PhD student at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore as well. Yeah, and I also have to thank the all volunteer team from SCCS Bangalore, because the podcast material was actually stuck in the customs, and I think without them we wouldn't have been able to conduct the interviews at all.
They were extremely helpful. So I also thank all of them for supporting you while you were in Bangalore. And so joining us in the studio in just a moment here is one of the organizers for SCCS Bangalore.
Yes, Robin Vijayan, who is a research fellow at the National Center for Biological Science in Bangalore, India. And he will tell us what, when, and how SCCS Bangalore started.
Yeah, and so just for the listeners out there, when we finish this interview with Robin, I'm just going to take a back seat and leave the rest of the programming to Cecile. So I hope everyone enjoys. Okay, so in the studio here, we have over Google Hangouts, Robin joining us, one of the organizers of the SCCS. So Robin, can you just first start by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you are, what you do, and how you got involved in the SCCS?
Yeah, so I study ecology and evolution of birds on mountaintops, on sky islands in India. And so as part of my research, I collaborate with quite a few other people, and the SCCS came in about in 2010 to India, and it was already quite popular with students when it was running in Cambridge even before. So when it came here, I got a chance to get involved as a volunteer, like Cecil was at this conference in Bangalore. And then later, 2 years later, some folks asked me if I'd like to help out and step into the organizing committee. And that seemed great. That seemed like a great idea. So I was there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So can you describe a bit more what is SCCS actually?
Yeah, sure. So SCCS started out in Cambridge, I think about 15 years back. And their agenda was to kind of get students working on conservation from different parts of the world over there. And some of the faculty who were in Bangalore happened to go to these conferences. like Dr. Sukumar and Suhail and some others. And they found that this had great value, and a lot of Indian students were turning up there. And from there kind of originated this idea of starting a sister conference in Bangalore. And in 2010, they came here. And in India, actually, we were a little bit surprised about how things took off, because students really took to it quite well. So essentially it's largely for students, and it's primarily capacity building. So students share their research, but in India there's a big focus on workshops. That's just because how the Indian setup is. We don't have many academic conferences running in India, so students flock to it, to this only annual event. And also because the university and undergraduate education doesn't seem to have too many new tools that they teach in methods of doing science. So they're very excited about all these young faculty in Bangalore offering all these really interesting, cool workshops. So that's another thing that is a major attraction for students of SCCS in Bangalore. So one of the actually, it's partly by accident and partly by intent. The way SCCS has been set up in India is that it's run by a conglomerate of institutions. There are many different institutions that actually run the conference. So it's not run by any one institution. So as a consequence of this, we have a diversity of professors and resource people who are willing to offer workshops, because many institutions are involved. And also as a result of this, there are volunteers from different institutions. There are a lot of students who want to participate in this, and the volunteers really are the life of the conference. Yes. They run everything.
Yeah.
And that's our highlight, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So can I just back up for a second here? Can you give us an impression of what the current state of conservation and conservation activities is in India? I know you mentioned Dr. Sukumar there a minute ago, and we had him actually on the podcast a few episodes ago.
That's right.
When he came through Japan.
Yes.
He told us all about the human-elephant conflicts and this being a really big issue. But can you give us maybe more broadly an idea of what the situation is?
That's a bit more challenging, but I'll give it a shot. So in general, I think there's a big move for conservation in India. So there is a wider engagement about conservation that's happening in the domain, because there are all kinds of events. I mean, some of them are negative, some of them are positive, that are kind of highlighting this. So there are issues like man-animal conflict with large mammals, like Dr. Sukumar spoke about at your podcast. And there are also leopards and tigers living in very close proximity with humans. And that is a big problem in India. And people initially thought that there was the only simple way to do that was to keep the people out and the people and animals separate. And increasingly, people are just beginning to realize that that's really not possible given the high density of people that we have in India.
So SCCS Bangalore is usually for conservationists or students interested in conservation from Asia and Africa. And you mentioned at the end of the conference that the future goals would be to also get more people from Africa, because you have many students coming over, well, lots of Indians and lots of students from Asia, but you still need to have more people from the other continent. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the reasons, and we keep getting this feedback, so every year we have about 5 or 6 African students. I think this year we had a little bit less, but every year we get feedback from other students saying that they are surprised that some of the conservation challenges that we face are so similar in Africa. So a lot of the systems that they have and we have seem to be very similar. So it seems like a natural place to kind of share, natural region to share information with. So we would want more students to come from there and more resource people. We just have to think about newer ways to put people together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It really seems like a great effort. I was talking with Cecile earlier. Before this year, we didn't even know that these SCCS conferences existed, and so when I happened to stumble across, actually, I stumbled across the one in Cambridge. I was quite impressed, and I thought, wow, what a great idea and opportunity for students. So I think obviously part of this is just continuing to spread the word. So hopefully doing things like this can help in a small way.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, one of the, when you guys wrote to us, I mean, it was like, it was a eureka moment, because it was like, why didn't we think of this? This is perfect, because there are so many students in India who are not able to come to the conference, but they would really like to hear more about what happens behind the research, and what are the people like? All these people who come and give these great talks, what do they go through? A little bit more about them. And so your podcast series is fantastic, and I should really thank you guys for coming over and kind of opening our eyes to this sphere. And we really want to start this as a regular feature at SCCS.
Well, that would be fantastic. And, if we could feel even tiny bit responsible for that, I'll carry that with pride for as long as I'm around. But yes. when we first did...
I will be glad to go there every year.
Yeah, right. Okay. You heard it here. So I did want to thank you very much sincerely, because when we did contact you, and the welcome we received was so warm, and you definitely helped Cecile a lot during her time there. So great amount of thanks here from the PrimateCast.
Thank you guys for everything as well.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us on the PrimateCast, Robin.
Okay, yeah, bye.
Now, let's go back to Bangalore and start with one of the most renowned conservationists in India working on human-elephant conflict, Mr. Ananda Kumar, who was invited as a plenary speaker of SCCS Bangalore 2014, and Durgesh had the opportunity to interview him.
Tell us about yourself and give us a bit of background that what you have been working with.
I am with the Nature Conservation Foundation, which is basically based in Mysore. I work in Western Ghats region in the Annamalai Hills. So I have been studying elephants for the past 12 years with a group of conservation scientists in the Annamalai Hills.
From today's talk, I have come to know that you have been working with the human-elephant conflict. I just want to know that how you entered into this field.
I've been in these Annamalais for the past 20 years. So working on different species like primates, so lion-tailed macaques, bonnet macaques, Nilgiri langur and Hanuman langurs. So that was a time that when we were actually working, me and my colleagues Divya Mudappa and Shankaraman. So we were asked by the companies there that they are facing a little bit of trouble with the elephants thing, and they wanted us to start work. So that's how we actually began Annamalai Elephant Program.
So it was basically company interest, not your own interest.
It was partially our interest as well, but the need of the hour was such that we really need to channelize our research efforts to understand elephants and people in this.
So can you highlight that what you are doing in this field and how you are conducting your work?
Basically what we are trying is that we have been trying to understand elephants and people and their relationships. And so based on rigorous scientific research and application of that research in addressing the issue of human-elephant conflict.
Would you like to try to highlight some elephant behavior here, so that how did you study the animal behavior during this research work? That would be more interesting.
See, here elephants have to face people. So if you look at the elephant, if it has to walk for about 1 kilometer, so it has to go through some colony or manager's bungalow or a factory. So it is inevitable for elephants, to interact with some human structures or to interact with people. So that's the thing. That's the situation. And see, actually, the elephants really tolerate people, and people also tolerate elephants. So, what is lacking here is that when there is a surprise encounter, that will lead to, you know, unwanted results. So, this is what we are actually looking at. So, we investigate it. So, how these surprise encounters are actually happening, how the incidents are actually happening, so where are the damages are happening. So that's how we figured it out, that there are certain locations, like buildings which store food grains like rice, dal, lentils, salt, sugar, which are damaged by elephants, and they also damaged school noon meal centers, so which store food grains for school children as a part of midday meal scheme, Government of India scheme. So when these structures are very close to residential places, even residential places will also get hit, which is a traumatic thing. So we identified hotspots within this plantation landscape, and so we conveyed that information to plantation companies that to shift to have a better storage facilities or to have mobile ration system. So some companies have actually adopted this, so that's why at those areas actually there has been no conflict for the past several years. So it's just like that, instead of having 10 ration shops in a small place, have one ration shop and better protection to that place. And also that people also distribute ration once in a week in a particular estate, so that it will not be stored for a long time. So when elephants visit these places, they can see that the building is empty, and they will move away, because it's just only it's a investment actually for an elephant, from the elephant's perspective, that they have to invest so much to break certain things. So why should they take that kind of risk? Because they also need to face people as well. So that's the thing. So some of these measures which are taken, and even the forest department, which is extremely good in our area, the field staff will be there right at the place where the elephants are going to be there. So like ration shops or critical colonies. So they are giving enough protection. They are not chasing outrightly, but they are actually avoiding elephants entering in colonies. But what happens is, in spite of all this, so still there are some damages that will happen. So anyway, that damages cannot be brought down to zero, but it can be minimized substantially. So that's the point which I want to get across to people. And second thing is that loss of life occurred in surprise encounters without knowing that there were elephants. So it was basically the lack of information about elephants thing. What we did was that, with the help of companies, forest department, local people, we have developed elephant information network, in which we conveyed information about elephant presence, elephant locations to people through television, SMS, and alert indicators. So that has actually resulted in reducing number of incidents.
Yeah, it's a pretty good walk, and I just want to know, like, what you have plans for future in this field, especially with the human-elephant conflict. Have you been thinking more to extend your further research or further work?
We have recently initiated work in forest farm landscape, which is a hard edge boundary between a forest and agricultural landscape, because it's much more challenging, because there is a crop damage there, and loss of life is also being monitored in Coimbatore Forest Division as well as in Satyamangalam Forest Divisions. So we are trying to understand the basic things about the conflict thing, to look at elephants and people, and hopefully that will come out. The data would say highlight some certain key things, so that based on that we will take steps further.
Before we finish, just want to ask you one last question. What the main challenge you found while walking with this elephant, the huge animal? So what were the challenges, the main one, important one?
Challenge is that human-elephant relationships are always dynamic in nature. So one side, that one has to really look at the requirements of elephants in terms of their ecology, in terms of their behavior. At the same time, that we also need to think about people, because the thing is, these are the people who face elephants every day. So managing this, balancing, striking balance between people and elephant situations is the most challenging one.
Did you not encounter some accident with elephants while walking with them from close, very close distance?
Yeah, it happened several times, and one of the things that we didn't know that there was an elephant thing, and we went very close to elephant. But of course, elephants did not charge at us. But the mere presence of seeing an elephant in a very, very close quarters can actually, sends waves in your body. So the thing is, it's really traumatic. So one of the things that when I was observing elephants and recording their behaviors, my assistant, slept. So when I asked him to look after the elephants there, when I am concentrating on one particular individual for my behavioral study, and he got bored and slept in the tea bush. So after some time that I felt that somebody is actually watching me. So when I turned my head and I saw a tusker which was just 20 feet away. So I didn't know what to do. So whether I should get up and run, or I should yell out for my assistant, or I should make some noise, but I just kept quiet. But the tusker just stared at me for about a minute and went back. So that's so gentle.
Anything you wanna tell to the young researcher, like what we can do more in this field, especially with human settlement and the elephant conflict, where we can put some new research? You have some idea for the young researcher?
So one common thing that should be noticed and that should be followed is that if we are serious about striking a balance between people and elephants, when we are intending to work in human-dominated landscapes which are modified elephant habitats, we really need to understand the problem. Please don't jump at the conclusions. Please don't jump at the mitigation measures in the first phase. So one has to understand people and elephants. Then only what data says, a scientific investigation says, one has to apply that. Look at the possibility of coming up with locally appropriate, adaptive, feasible, participative mitigation measures. So that would actually help people and elephants.
More research. It's also what our next speaker told me about the future needs of conservation during this conference. So let's jump from human-elephant conflicts in the Western Ghats to Snow Leopard Conservancy in Ladakh. Hi Radhika, so welcome to the PrimateCast. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, thank you for inviting me. So I'm Radhika Kothari. I've just completed my master's in conservation leadership from the University of Cambridge. Prior to that, I was the director of Snow Leopard Conservancy India. I left that work last year. And I am originally from Bombay and been working in the mountains for about 6 to 7 years now, the Indian Himalayas basically.
Okay, so how did you hear about SCCS Bangalore?
Right. Well, SCCS is a very popular conference among students in India. And I had actually completed one. My colleague and I had received a Snow Leopard grant last year from the Snow Leopard Network. And we were doing some work. I thought I'll submit an abstract here for one of the student talks. And it got selected, and that's what got me here.
So what is the Snow Leopard Conservancy about, and what did you do for the project?
Right. Well, the Snow Leopard Conservancy is a local NGO based in Ladakh, that's in North India. It's been working there for snow leopard conservation with the local communities for over 10 years now. And I joined the organization in 2010. I was involved as the head of the organization. I was involved in a lot of activities of the organization itself, a lot of projects. But this particular grant was in the name of Jigmet Dadul, my colleague, and me. And the idea was to just understand the presence and status of snow leopards outside the national park, outside the Hemis National Park, which is in Ladakh. We do know, and we've been working outside the national park with the communities a lot, but we never knew what the status of snow leopards were. So this was this first step towards that.
How did you do that? You were also working with scientists, I guess, in the field?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, we did not have any biologists per se, but we had Jigmet, who has been working for snow leopard conservation for over 15 years. With his experience and my passion to do something in that place, we sort of combined the skills and then put a project together which got approved. So the idea was obviously population estimation in the Rong Valley of Ladakh, which is eastern Ladakh, and also get an understanding of the movement of snow leopards in terms of the human settlements there. And we also try to do community perceptions on what they think about snow leopards, what has been the depredation in the last 1 year or so, and also just get a sense of their attitude towards snow leopards and wildlife in general in that part.
So could you manage to answer some of these questions?
Well, it was a bit difficult, but we have a very good local team there. So we actually developed the questionnaires in the local language particularly and made sure that we all were on the same page and on how we want to ask the questions, where we are leading and everything. The community, since we've been working in Ladakh for such a long time, the community has been very responsive to us. And it was just like over a cup of coffee, a cup of tea there. You just sort of just talk to them generally and ask them questions, and they're always very open to answering us, which was the good part. I don't think such work is possible without the people who live there.
How do you see the future of snow leopard conservancy in Ladakh?
Well, it's got a very bright future, but since we are trying to strengthen our scientific projects, we hope to ensure that people know about not just the organization but the importance of snow leopards outside the national park. Hopefully, since now I am lit off my responsibilities of SLC and I've just completed my academics, I'm hoping to ensure that we write the papers, get the data published. I met a lot of people who want this data here. And it's very important now on my bit to ensure that this data is out and it's freely available for the world to see and ensure that they are able to extrapolate this into the larger programs for snow leopards across the world or in Central Asia or South Asia. I think we owe it to ourselves to do that now.
Okay, great. Yeah. And what are your personal perspectives?
Well, right now I just got back to India a couple of weeks back. I am exploring my options, but I am deeply in love with the Himalayas. So I am trying to explore some options there and continue working for the mountains. I do feel and know that climate change is such an important issue in the mountains, especially with the recent flooding events and such catastrophes happening there since a couple of years. We hope we are able to do something for them, for the people and the landscapes in the coming years. And I hope to contribute in that sector as well.
Great, fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Julie.
So for those who don't know, Julie in Ladakhi language means hello, goodbye, thank you. And Ladakh is a region between Pakistan and Tibet in northwest India, in the western Himalayan range, basically. I can tell you that because I was there just before the conference. I was traveling there. And that was absolutely fantastic. The people, the culture, the traditions. Even though I didn't see any snow leopards while trekking there, I heard about Snow Leopard Conservancy already. And by the time I couldn't make it, I couldn't visit the center. So I'm glad that I had the opportunity to talk with Radhika during the conference. Now, our next speaker will bring us away from the Himalayas, but will carry us on wildlife conservation issues in Africa. During SCCS 2014, I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Gladys Kalemasi-Kuzoka from Uganda, a plenary speaker of the conference.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gladys Kalemasi-Kuzoka, founder and chief executive officer of a grassroots NGO called Conservation Through Public Health. I'm here in Bangalore because I was invited by somebody called Dr. Madhu, who works with the Nature Conservation Foundation. I met him in England when we both got an award from the Whitley Fund for Nature, which supports outlining leadership in grassroots nature conservation. We met 5 years ago, and the reason why I got the award from the Whitley Fund for Nature is for our work in Uganda. I started out with a great interest in gorillas. I set up a wildlife club in the school that I was at, which made me want to work with wildlife. And shortly after that, I was introduced to the mountain gorillas in Uganda and the chimpanzees. And I eventually did my studies as a vet student in England on chimps, wild chimpanzees in Budongo Forest. And then a couple of years later, I did a similar study, looking at parasites in the dung in wild gorillas in Bwindi, the mountain gorillas. And especially my experience in Bwindi introduced me to issues of conservation and the role that tourism can play in conservation, and the role that research can play in conservation. And this led me to getting my first job as the vet for Uganda Wildlife Authority. And not only was it my first job, but I was also setting up a veterinary department from scratch. And I did that for 4.5 years. It was very interesting. But the main reason why they felt they needed a vet was because mountain gorilla tourism had just begun, and they were concerned that the people who were coming to visit the gorillas could actually make them sick. And they needed a vet to make sure that the gorillas were not getting diseases from the tourists. And so that position was created, and I took up that post. It was a very interesting job because I also ended up looking after other wildlife in the country. And that's kind of how I got into conservation.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm. So you created this conservation through public health, right?
Yes, I did.
So can you tell us a bit more about this big project?
Yes. One of my first cases as the vet for Uganda Wildlife Authority was there was a skin disease outbreak in one of the tourist gorilla groups. And when I got the message that the gorillas were losing hair and developing white scaly skin, I asked my counterparts in Rwanda, where they had a project going on, Mountain Gorilla Vet Project, and they had never seen anything like that before. And then I also spoke to a human doctor friend of mine who told me that one of the most common skin diseases in Uganda is scabies, which is sarcoptic mange, due to poor hygiene. And so when we went up to deal with the case, we went up with, it's a 10-hour drive from Kampala, where I was sitting at the National Park headquarters. We went up with what we thought we could use to treat the gorillas if they had scabies. And when we got there, we did find that they did have scabies. The infant gorilla had lost almost all its hair and was crying, which is very unusual for gorillas. And the rest of the group was scratching, especially the younger ones, and losing hair. And so we treated the rest of the group, and the mother dropped the baby, which died a few days later. And we were able to do a fresh post-mortem and found very many mites, which were causing loss of hair and eventually pneumonia. And so a few years later, we started to ask ourselves, where could the scabies have come from? Because it happened in that group, and later it happened in another group. And we realized that the people around were very unhygienic. They had less than adequate hygiene. And, they were defecating in the garden, not covering the rubbish heaps. And they were putting out scarecrows to scare away wildlife. But they put, of course, the dirtiest piece of clothing. They don't really have easy access to water, which they have to carry from the river at the bottom of the valley. And so they were not bathing a lot, they were not washing their clothes often, and all of that was leading to poor hygiene and diseases like scabies. So I was asked as the only vet in the organization to lead a health education campaign on risks of human and gorilla disease transmission, which I went ahead to do. I really, really enjoyed it. But it was also a turning point in my life, because after we presented all the information to the communities, together with the district health people and community conservation rangers and wardens, we asked them what they thought about it, and they came up with very good suggestions. They all wanted access to health services, they wanted access to safe water, and they wanted to continue to improve their hygiene. So they were very aware that their hygiene wasn't good, and they wanted to improve on that. And then they also wanted to strengthen the human and gorilla conflict team, which chases gorillas out of the park. Out of community gardens. So out of all that, and plus research which I did on tuberculosis at the Human Wildlife Livestock Interface as part of my master's in North Carolina, where we looked at TB in people going close to gorillas, which is the park staff and the community members where the gorillas are always going out.
So what did you find?
We found that 25% of people who had chronic coughs had tuberculosis. And it was very interesting because we would get to a community, and the district health person, the same person we had worked with a couple of years ago with the health education programs, would say to me, don't worry, when we get to the community, we'll find people who are sick. Because the health services are so limited, people don't report themselves to the health center. You have to go and look for them. So we get to a community and ask who is coughing, who's been coughing for a long time, and they would point to different people, and we'd get to them and talk to them and interview them and take their samples. And then we found that 25% of these people had tuberculosis, and yet their gorillas were visiting them regularly. And so that was a very big eye-opener for me. We did it in another national park, which has savanna species, which has buffalo, cattle, and people, and we're trying to see how TB is spreading from the buffalo to the cattle to the people, or vice versa. And there they had a system called community-based direct observation of treatment, where your next door neighbor watches you taking treatment every day for 8 months. In Burundi, they didn't have that system, so 2 people died during my study. And that made me realize that actually we needed to bring such kind of health services to the community.
Because of some technical problem, the first part of the interview with Gladys was interrupted. So to catch up with what she said in between, actually I asked her what was the impact of conservation through public health on both the gorillas and the people. During her talk, she already mentioned that the impact of the program on gorillas was to decrease the disease rate. And now she's gonna tell us what was the impact on the local people.
The impact in the people has been, I did mention the fact that they're more positive about conservation, but as far as the health impacts go, the family planning has drastically increased. It's much higher than the national average now. It's about 60%, whereas the national average is 28%. And we started out when it was less than the national average. The hygiene and sanitation has increased a lot. Adoption of hand washing facilities outside the toilet and things like that, drying racks, clean water storage containers has really increased, over 50%. We've had a very big increase, 11 times, of people being referred for tuberculosis and other diseases. And men are more involved in family planning, which in the public health sector is very important, because they found that when they're not involved, it's not really sustainable. And because when they get involved in family planning, then they can talk to their wives about many other things. So in the end, actually it helps with the whole gender issues in the household. So we are happy about that impact. And
you said during your talk that the average kids per family in Burundi is even higher than in Uganda.
It's
about 10 children per
family.
So,
Exactly. Yeah, it's really shocking. 10 children per family when we did the survey. And that's just the ones who've lived live births, not the ones who, if you count those, then it will be even higher. And the average family size in Uganda is 7, which is still higher than the rest of the world. So there is a lot of work to do there. But what we're finding is that women will tell you that the volunteers who we work with, the village health and conservation teams, will tell you that women are not having babies every year. Now they're waiting and they're doing other things with their lives. So I think it's empowered the women much more, something which we were not aiming to do, but has ended up being a result, a benefit of the program, a good side effect. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So congratulations. So what are the next steps of conservation through public health?
The next steps of conservation through public health is to scale up the approach to other parts of the forest, and we've started doing it in another 2 high human and gorilla conflict parishes, and then with some funding it's primarily to scale up the most basic elements of the approach, which is making sure that we have village health and conservation teams who visit homes regularly and improve their conservation attitudes and public health practices. And then at the same time, we are also, continuing with the disease monitoring and other aspects of conservation. And then we also want to scale up to other protected areas in Virunga National Park, where there are also mountain gorillas and other types of gorillas in Mount Shabirumu. We're working with the Congolese wildlife authorities and NGOs to scale it up in that area. And then we also want to scale it up in savanna protected areas within Uganda. The Uganda Wildlife Authority wants us to do that, and we've started that in 2 savanna protected areas, Queen Elizabeth National Park and Pianupe Wildlife Reserve. And then through East African regional networks, some groups are adopting the approach in Kenya, and we want to work around Mount Elgon with the government bodies like Lake Victoria Basin Commission and others. And then generally the main thing that we want to do is to scale up the approach, but we're also building a big health and gorilla conservation center, which is going to house all our projects, the disease diagnostics and the community education. And we hope it's a place also where tourists can come and visit and learn about what we're doing, and students can come and study. We're also hosting university students from other countries and in Uganda. And because they come there to study about the work we're doing, whether it's public health, angle, veterinarians, medical students, conservation students, community development, it's a good place to get an idea of how these things work.
Yeah, exactly.
And it helps them either whether they're undergraduate or master students or even PhD students. So we definitely want to strengthen that, because we feel that we need to strengthen up, we need to partner with research institutions and higher learning institutions to be able to study in more detail the different things we're doing to make sure that we're having the impact that we want to have in the end. So we need to bring in an element of research. Actually, our donors are asking us more about how is this relating to that, and so we need to really strengthen that side of things, and we're very happy to partner with university institutions. Yeah.
So then what would be your message for students who want to get involved in conservation?
I think my message for students who want to get involved in conservation is to focus on when they get into an area, they should look at what is needed by the community, and then find a way of addressing that, rather than coming in and saying, I think this is what the community needs. They need to be very willing to listen to what the community has to say, their stakeholders in the area, so that they're able to do something which is relevant. So there's an element of having a lot of humility to listen to what people want, and getting them to also understand that you're trying to help them. And when you're introducing something, even if it's your research project or a program or project in the area, you have to make sure that people understand it and buy into it and engage them as much as possible. We had a student, a very good student, who came to do research with us, and she was looking at whether tourists were willing to wear masks during a gorilla visit. And she's called Alison Haynes. And what she found is that she was really, really good at, because she knew that at the end of the day, Uganda Wildlife Authority has to buy into this research so that they can implement the recommendations. And so from the beginning, she engaged herself with them. We gave her the platform, we introduced her to all the stakeholders, and she really made it a point to update Uganda Wildlife Authority on her research very regularly, almost every day, and got their input on how to improve on it, how to approach the tourists and everything, so that by the end of it, they all understood what she was doing, and so they're more likely to implement those recommendations. And I really encouraged her to do that.
With our next speaker, we will stay in Africa, but move from Uganda to Tanzania. So here is Dina's interview with Dan Brockington, a professor of conservation and development at the School of Environment, Education and Development at the University of Manchester.
How did it all start?
Well, I began my work as a PhD student back in 1994 in Tanzania, when I was part of a project funded by what was then the Overseas Development Agency, ODA, and is now morphed into Department for International Development, DFID. And we were trying to understand how conservation policies had affected people who had lived inside a game reserve and were now, after eviction, living outside it. And there were two of us in the team. There was a Tanzanian woman called Hilda Kiwasila, who was working with agricultural communities, and I was working with the pastoral communities. And to our surprise, we were able to find a huge amount of information about the history of this game reserve. A number of archival records became available which hadn't been before. I undertook quite an arduous livelihood survey, which lasted the best part of 2 years. And we were able to combine that with natural science research taking place within the game reserve. And also to match that match those findings to some of the publicity that was being released about the game reserve as it tried to acquire an international profile. And we found that a lot of the facts and ideas that were coming out of our work simply had no place in the publicity, in the profile. And part of the reason for that was that some of the ideas being produced were in the publicity were not true, and others were misleading. And that caused it no problem. And so the first part of my work was trying to understand where the power of those ideas came from, why it was that it was so difficult to challenge them, what appealed in those ideas to two different audiences, and what helped to produce those ideas of a particular vision for Africa that could, we had shown, have such hard consequences locally. And so from that it evolved a dual interest in the nature of livelihood change in rural situations, how it is that people cope with adverse circumstances, how they organise their resource management, how they manage, how natural resources are governed in context where local people are predominantly in charge, and then in other contexts where the state is in charge, where the ideas and philosophies and power to govern things by states comes from. The latter idea led into questions about how visions of wild Africa are produced through film, and the role of celebrity in endorsing those in environmental causes, and to a more comparative exploration of what made conservation powerful, how it could in fact ally upon various forms of capitalism, producing products for sale, creating new markets in ecotourism, which again tied in with the whole commercialization of celebrity.
So you've basically summarized almost what you're currently also working on.
Not quite. That was up to about 2005.
Okay. So would you like to elaborate on what current projects you're working on and what you would like to do, which you don't have currently the resources or the chance or the opportunity
Certainly,
to do?
Yeah. I've just finished a book about celebrity advocacy and international development, and that was a result of a 2-year fellowship based on work mainly in the UK, which was trying to understand how celebrity advocacy had evolved and what shaped it, and how it worked or did not work. The main conclusions from that were that the belief in celebrity is much greater than the actual reach of celebrity. This makes it a difficult tool to use with working with publics. It's not as powerful as you might expect, but a very effective tool when working with elites, because they subscribe to that belief very thoroughly. I was very happy to do that work. It kind of tied up that interest, and I'm very happy now to move on from it. I've been fortunate to spend a whole year in Tanzania on a sabbatical with my family, and I was working on new questions of rural livelihood change, and a project which looked at the work of microfinance run by the NGO BRAC. And now I'm focusing on that livelihood change. So I've got a project with a man called Phil Woodhouse, again funded by DFID and the UK Research Councils, which is looking at agriculture in East Africa and the role of irrigated agriculture in particular in livelihoods. And my own project, all funded by the same donor, is resurveying households that were first visited in the early to mid-1990s and trying to explore what types of livelihood change and change in prosperity there has been over the last 20 years. Because it's a contested field. One group of people suggest that Tanzania, which is where the work is being done, it has become a lot richer, and the whole country is richer as a result, and another group of people are saying that if you look at what happens to poverty, there's no real change. We're using a slightly different measure of poverty, not using income-based measures, we're using asset-based measures. Our pilot study showed there's been dramatic improvement, but it's just a pilot study. So now we have to expand across other areas. And I hope to use this to engage in policies which could have a transformative effect on the landscape and economy of large parts of the country, where they have brought in what they call growth corridors, which will result in transformations to agriculture and livelihoods, but which are predicated on certain assumptions as to how farmers behave. And I'm not sure the historical data that we're collecting as to how farmers have changed will back up the ideas about how farmers will change, all of which has tremendous implications for conservation, because it determines the nature of land use around protected areas and around areas which are still quite wild.
Actually, the other question I had thought about was about your book, The Celebrity and Advocacy and International Development. So I thought I would ask you to elaborate on it, which you have already.
Right.
And so I was watching this YouTube video with your interview on George Galloway.
Yes.
And you mentioned something about racial politics there.
Yes.
And how it has an impact on the conservation policies in Africa.
Yeah.
Or it has had. So would you like to
Sure.
talk about that? And
yes,
is it really a concern, and if it is, then why?
This was back in 2009, and it was really, I felt I had answered to my own satisfaction the question which had got me into this in the first place, which was why there is a particular breed of celebrity conservationist which characterises East African, Southern African landscapes, which you don't find in other parts of the world. As I said, you don't find these people in India or Southeast Asia. There's not the political, commercial space for them. And these people are characterised largely by their whiteness, in ways which cannot be explained by the fact that you have white South Africans and white Kenyans in play. You certainly do have those people who are representing wild nature in Africa, but there's too much whiteness. It's not representative of the continent. And what my feeling here is that this is produced partly by a popular demand in the UK and the US to have white figures savouring Africa, that we like to see people in this role. It makes for good television, it makes for safe, easy NGO campaigns where you have people negotiating the interface between this incredibly complex, mysterious, unknown continent with these difficult politics, which you can't see through. It's incredibly murky, but you have these saviour figures who are able to do that for you.
And does it also not provide the opportunity for the locals to have that same representation as the whites?
Well, if it did, then you'd have a different complexion to the representatives.
And you work a lot on neoliberal policies and how they've suddenly come into this mainstream of social sciences. So, I would like if you could elaborate on it. I mean, what do you think are the pitfalls or the advantages of using this?
I came into the thinking about neoliberal environmentalism through the work of a man called Noel Castry, who's a very brilliant geographer at the University of Manchester. And one of the aspects of his brilliance is his ability to summarise succinctly and very effectively vast areas of scholarship. And he was summarising work on environmental policies which were characterised by the neoliberal philosophies and practices. And I realised that, in fact, a lot of the conservation policies that he was talking about also shared these neoliberal characteristics. And a part of what I then tried to do with Jim Igoe in an article that came out in Conservation Society called Neoliberal Conservation, A Brief Introduction. But part of what we tried to do there was to communicate our work to a broader group of social scientists who didn't often get conservation. They thought conservation was a kind of good thing that opposed capitalism, and it wasn't this more complex political arena. And we were able to say, no, all the processes that you're observing, the commodification, the commercialisation, the rolling back of the state in some ways, the rolling out of the state in others, the reliance on NGOs, all these things are visible in conservation practice, and they're part of conservation practice. And on the other hand, it was a useful, more than just some sort of academic PR exercise, this was actually a very important way of understanding how conservation is changing. Because for many years, you could see that part of conservation's self-identity was to oppose development, was to say that we don't want particular changes to come in, that if you build here or develop here or create military installations or power stations or dams or roads, you are going to be ruining nature. And conservation was about opposing what capitalism and states were trying to do. And we said, no. Actually, a lot of what happens in conservation is an alliance with different forms of capitalism. And some of my colleagues would say, right, and what we need to do now is stop the alliance. I would take a slightly different view. I'd say we need to recognise this, and we need to think, okay, so how is this alliance working for who? Can we change the terms? Do we treat all allies as equal? Do we want to work with some groups, not others? But let's recognise that conservation is not about opposing capitalism anymore. In fact, capitalism and conservation are working together to change the world.
So, drawing back from all your research, would you like to share some interesting field stories which are not really available to the research community by scientific publications?
The story which my children like laughing at me about is the time when I was doing my PhD in around the Umkomati Game Reserve, and I was staying in. I had to move around a lot in that job, a lot. And one of the places I stayed was this large building, part of an engineering project. And when I woke up one morning, there was a bat that had fallen through the ceiling. It got caught in the mosquito net, got caught in the bed, and hadn't got out. And I thought, oh, you poor thing, and I released the bat back into the roof. The next day, it had fallen into the net again. Next morning, and I thought, oh, you poor thing. Released the bat back and left the place, and then went on to I was cycling around different Maasai Parakuyu bomas, the pastoral bomas, the counting cattle and measuring milk yields and things. And I had this cut on my ankle that wasn't healing. And I thought, that's strange. And then I remembered I'd seen on TV that vampire bats, they land near their prey, they crawl up to them, they bite them on the ankle. Their saliva prevents the blood from congealing, and so it then comes back to feed in the same place the next day. And I thought, well, I wonder if I've been bitten by a vampire bat. Now this is before email and things, and so I thought, that's a fascinating story. So I wrote home and said, I think I've been bitten by a vampire bat. This is what happened. And I wasn't staying near a post office, so I carried the letter around in my bag for a couple of weeks, and eventually got out of the field and found a post office and posted the letter. It took 2 or 3 weeks to get there, and my parents opened it, and an hour later they sent a telegram saying, get rabies and vaccination immediately. Go now. And this telegram went to my post box, which is in a different city entirely, and another couple of weeks later I came back and picked up this telegram. We didn't have mobile phones or anything like that. And I wasn't sure what to do, because you have about 6 weeks from being bitten on the foot by a rabid animal to coming up with rabies, and I was pretty close by that stage to actually being infectious. And my father's a doctor, and he rang up various clinics in Dar es Salaam at great expense, and eventually found one which said, which had rabies vaccines, and he said, there's a young man coming to see you. In his doctor's voice, you would administer the following treatments to him. Make sure you do that and let me know. And I, after a couple of days, worked out where the clinic was and turned up. And I was just a little bit too relaxed about this. And the doctor was thinking, "Are you sure you're doing this?" And it's worth doing this. And I didn't think it was, but I didn't want to disobey my parents over this particular issue. So I just said, "Look, you may be right. Just let my dad know that you can't do it." So anyway, I got the vaccines, and I don't think well, I think I was. I just don't think it was rabid.
Okay. Would you like to talk about your family?
Oh yes. So in the last sabbatical, my wife is Tanzanian.
Okay.
And we have 2 children, Rosie and Emily, 9 and 11. And we had a sabbatical year in Tanzania, 2012, 2013, which is the best thing, I think, which has ever happened to us. I mean, we were living in my wife's village next door to my parents-in-law. And my children were going to the local school, Darasla Sita Darasla Ne, class 5, class 6. Class 4, class 6.
Okay.
And they learned to speak Swahili. They could start playing with their cousins. I began making inroads into my wife's language, which is a Cushitic language and incredibly difficult. And it was just a chance to get back to basics. It was high up, no mosquitoes, no rabid vampire bats. It was a wonderful place to be.
As you understood, Dan Brockington was a plenary speaker of the conference. And actually, his talk was very nice. So I encourage you to check out his webpage and to read his books. You will find the link through our website. And now, because SCCS is a student conference, we are going to listen to two students who are going to tell us a bit more about their work and why they have been coming to SCCS Bangalore 2014.
I have with me Naven Hon, who is from Cambodia and who has worked extensively with gibbons. He is presenting a poster in SCCS this year. I would like to know, Naven, how did you come into the field of conservation, and please also let us know about your work.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, why I'm really interested in conservation. I live in a remote area where the forest or natural resources have been exploited, and the people just look at but they don't do it. So I'm passionate in doing that cause. But in order to do that, I have to get higher education. Currently, I study Master of Science in Ecology and Biodiversity, and I'm really interested in gibbon, in food gibbon conservation and gibbon. Yeah.
Okay, is this your first time to SCCS?
Yeah, actually, it's my second time. The first time I presented Asian smallholder on food references of Asian smallholder, and this time I'm present on gibbons, a variation of yellow-chest gibbon. It is a new species described in 2010. And SPS not just only a conference, it's just like a building network of young conservationists around the world. For example, I'm really interested in gibbon, but just only one species, and other people know more than that. So I'm not just sharing my knowledge, but I gain other knowledge from other people as well. And we are conservation not just only one country, but around the globe. It's my objective.
So Naven, how do you like this year's SCCS?
This year I met a lot of primatologists. It is one of the reasons that I come here, and I learn a lot from other people as well. And especially I building network from different countries, like from India, from Singapore, and from other countries like Sri Lanka, who are interested in primate and other fields as well in terms of conservation. Yeah.
After Naven, Pankaj interviewed Amila Sumanapala from Sri Lanka, who was presenting a poster on dragonflies.
Actually, my poster is based on a study I have carried out in one of the urban wetlands in Sri Lanka. So I wanted to study the diversity and the use of different habitat types of different Odonata species. And also, I am currently still doing the project for a period of 1 year, trying to study their phenology, changes in their population within a year, and to see any seasonal differences are present in the area.
So Amila, we would like to know more about how did you come into the conservation field?
Actually, I got into the conservation field through. I always had a feeling towards the animals, and I liked them a lot. And then after some time during my school years, I got to know that there are a lot of work to be done in the field of biology, especially in the field biology. So I wanted to do something and become. Actually, first I wanted to become a taxonomist. Then I get into the field of field biology, and then learn about conservation issues in Sri Lanka. And then with time I moved towards conservation science, and currently I am studying environmental conservation and management, and hoping to become a conservationist one day and to do something about the conservational issues in Sri Lanka and the region.
So Amila, is this your first time in SCCS Bangalore?
Yes, this is my first time.
So how is the experience?
It's great, actually. I got to know about the conference from one of my friends who attended last year. So she said that this is a great opportunity to meet people in the region and share their experiences and learn new things. So I wanted to try that. I wanted to meet people in the region and learn from their experiences. And here I got to know many people from India and surrounding countries, and also even from Madagascar. So it's really beautiful. I mean, meeting people and learning from their experiences is quite great. And also I got to learn from I attended several workshops and learned new things from that. That's quite wonderful.
So Amila, one last question. So people talk about large mammal conservation. They talk about species which are flagship in nature, and you can do a lot with the landscape and all. So you are studying dragonflies, which are insects. So how do you think studying insects can help in conservation?
Well, we should understand that the large mammals are not the only component in the nature. It's a web of life. I mean, there are many small forms of life that are present in the nature and also contributing to the balance of the ecosystem. So, just like a large mammal, every single creature is important for the ecosystem. Definitely, it's critical and it's necessary to study all these animals and to learn from their other animals and get that involved in the conservation field. Not only the large species matters when the conservation is taken into account. So we have to study about the small animals also. And in another thing is in countries like tropical countries like Sri Lanka and India, there's a huge diversity in small life forms like dragonflies, butterflies, and other insects. It's really diverse and there's a huge endemic percentage in the countries. So we have to study that and we have to learn from them and use that in knowledge to the conservation of all the biota. That's what I'm intended to do by studying dragonflies and involve that knowledge into biodiversity conservation in the area.
I agree with Amila. And I think that we often forget how much the invisible or the small species can shape the visible or the large species. In our next podcast, you are gonna hear about drones and communication in conservation science, and also about other crazy things that happened at SCCS Bangalore 2014. So stay tuned.
You have been listening to the PrimateCast, a podcast series dedicated to the study and conservation of primates around the world. Brought to you by the Centre for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology of the Primate Research Institute of Kyoto University. Visit us online at www.cicaspr.pi.kyoto-u.ac.jp/news/podcasts and follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/thePrimateCast and on Twitter at thePrimateCast.